2001, a Houston case received national attention and had lasting impacts. Andrea Yates, a mother of 5, drowned her children in the family's Clear Lake home. What followed was a long legal battle over severe mental illness, criminal responsibility, and how the justice system should respond. We start with a look back at how the case unfolded. In 2002, Andrea Yates stood trial in Houston, charged with capital murder. Prosecutors argued Yates carefully planned her actions and knew they were wrong, meeting the legal standard for criminal responsibility under Texas law. Prosecutor Joe Omby.
It's not that I am without sympathy. It's not that you are without sympathy. But what you're asked to do at this point is decide this case on the facts and the law, not sympathy for Andrea Yates.
No.
Defense attorneys countered that Yates suffered from severe mental illness, including postpartum psychosis. They said she was a mother who thought she was saving her children from hell. Defense attorney George Parnham.
If this woman doesn't meet the test of insanity in this state, then nobody does. Zero.
Texas law said Yates could only be found insane if she didn't know what she was doing. The state claimed her story about satanic delusions came only after the murder, after she talked to police. Prosecutor Kaylin Williford.
She looked him eye to eye and said, I killed my kids. Not I saved my kids, not I am the great Satan and I needed to be executed because of the cruel dilemma I have been in. I killed my kids.
Every time you see a child laugh, it will stab your heart because you'll remember this trial.
When the prosecution repeated the details of the murders, how 5 children struggled so hard to stay alive, Yates cried. Her husband watched as he heard the defense paint her the way he remembered her. Defense attorney Wendell Odom Jr.
Andrea Yates was a loving mother, perhaps too much of a loving mother. Common sense, ladies and gentlemen. Does a loving mother kill her 5 children if she knows it's wrong?
It seemed like every day of testimony in the first trial was filled with heartbreaking testimony, some of it extremely hard for all to take in. On one day, Andrea Yates had to sit in trial and see pictures and video of her children lying lifeless on a bed. Some were bruised from struggling. Then the jury had to endure a 16-minute silent videotaped walkthrough of the Yates household that day. The crime scene investigator looked on as the court watched the tape, taking the viewer down the hallway, seeing John's white, wet sock, and seeing the bathtub where 7-year-old Noah was laying dead, bruised, and face down.
I couldn't imagine what the children went through, mostly the children.
But the drama kept going that day. A taped confession played in court showed Noah put up the toughest battle. Question, did he try to run from you? Answer, yes. Did he get out of the bathtub, or were you able to catch him? Answer, I got him. She also described how Mary was in the bathroom crying as her brothers were being drowned. As to the why, I realized that it was time to be punished. Question, what did you need to be punished for? Answer, for not being a good mother. Prosecutors telling the jury no loving mother would chase down her children, hold them down as each one tried to breathe in a bathtub full of water.
Andrea Yates knew right from wrong, and she made a choice on June 20th to kill her children deliberately with deception.
The defense countering, saying Yates was suffering from a severe psychotic episode.
If we have an insanity law, and if Andrea Yates is not insane, then we just really don't have an insanity defense, do we? She's the sickest woman several of these doctors had ever seen.
The jury would have to decide guilty of murder or not guilty by insanity. The day finally came when they had a verdict.
In cause number 880205, the state of Texas versus Andrea P. Yates. We, the jury, find the defendant, Andrea P. Yates, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. Signed by the foreperson.
Yates was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
Probably count on one hand the number of times that Justice Nucci has written an opinion reversing a criminal case.
But that conviction would not stand. In 2005, an appeals court overturned Yates' conviction after discovering a key prosecution expert gave false testimony. So there was a second trial, and the case was argued all over again. But this time,
Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict in each case?
a different outcome.
We, the jury, find the defendant Andrea P. Yates not guilty by reason of insanity. Signed, Todd Christopher Frank, foreman of the jury.
This time the jury sided with the defense. Instead of prison, Yates was committed to a state mental hospital where she remains under court supervision.
I think the right thing was done, and mental health, I think, has been addressed. That's so important. This case is almost a watershed for mental illness in the criminal justice system.
Also relieved by the verdict, Andrea Yates' former husband, Rusty.
A woman who we perceive to be also a victim in all this, just like our children are, is going to get a better quality of life for herself, for the balance of her life, which we're all very, very happy about.
A defeat for prosecutors.
We are extremely disappointed with the verdict. We respect the hard work that the jurors put into their case.
The Andrea Yates case is now widely cited in discussions about mental illness, the insanity defense, and how the justice system balances accountability with treatment. Legal experts say the case continues to influence how courts nationwide evaluate mental health evidence in criminal trials.
One of the central questions in this case was Andrea Yates' mental state and whether she could be held criminally responsible.
I sat down with longtime Houston defense attorney George Parnham, who represented Yates through both of her trials and fought for the insanity defense.
We, the jury, find the defendant Andrea P. Yates not guilty by reason of insanity.
George Parnham clearly recalls the first time he met his client, Andrea Yates, one day after she killed her 5 children. The jail psychiatrist warned him.
She has a bald spot on top of her head. She's trying to scratch off the 666 off the top of her head.
Yates's original conviction in 2002 was overturned because prosecution witness Dr. Park Dietz had given false testimony. The case sparked national attention about postpartum depression and psychosis. In 2006, she was retried and acquitted.
This case is almost a watershed for mental illness in the criminal justice system.
It changed perceptions of women's mental health socially and legally. As for Andrea's account of that day, Parnham says she was so fragile.
I never asked her.
Really?
Yes, I never asked her. I always got what I wanted to get out of the testimony of the witnesses.
As we approach the 25-year mark since that day, there is renewed attention and new theories about the tragedy.
There was a cult aspect to trigger Andrea's actions.
No, not really, because Andrea, because she was so delusional, did not want them to grow up in a sinful world. And that's why she did what she did.
Andrea had a well-documented history of severe mental illness. She drowned her 5 children, aged 6 months to 7 years, in the family bathtub. She then tucked 4 of them into bed. The oldest, Noah, was too heavy to move. Her husband, Rusty, a NASA engineer, was at work.
The drownings happened at what was then the Yates family home here in Clear Lake. I have a distinct memory of standing on the street across from the house covering this story at the time. I was 7 months pregnant.
The case left its mark on the national conscience. Today, at 85, Parnham has retired from most legal matters, but still represents Andrea and regularly visits her at the Kerrville State Mental Hospital.
She likes Cracker Barrel, right? So I go get lunch at Cracker Barrel's, and we'll sit down in the back and have lunch.
He says she's come a long way and even works with other troubled patients.
Andrea will act as a go-between and talk to them,
Each year, she waives her right to ask for a release or transfer.
As a practical matter, this is where Andrea will be the rest of her life.
That's where she wants to stay, yeah.
Parnham and his wife also visit the children at the cemetery in Webster where they are buried. Small toys sit along the family headstone.
I get flowers for the kids' graves and take them out there. And
why is it important to you to do that?
I think from an emotional standpoint, it's a carryover from my days in the seminary.
A little-known fact about the storied criminal defense attorney, Parnham spent 5 years as a teenager in seminary studying for the priesthood.
Does that influence how you have responded to Andrea?
No question.
Barnum returns now to his first meeting with Andrea in the Harris County Jail, when she said only one thing the entire time.
She said, "Please don't leave me alone."
Not for 2.5 decades.
Ultimately, it was a jury that had to decide Andrea Yates' fate.
Todd Frank served as the foreman of the jury during her second trial, that retrial, a decision that still weighs on those who were in that courtroom. Here now is an extended conversation with Frank reflecting on that case. So let's fast forward to day one, and you are walking into that jury box for the first time as the case begins, and you see Andrea Yates. What was your first impression of her?
I was sad for her, right? I wasn't angry, but you could see that, I mean, she was just, I mean, she's a bereft parent at the end of the day, right? And I mean, my son had been born 6 months prior, and I couldn't imagine. I think at times, as I saw the pictures of the kids, yeah, I got angry. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was so sad for her as she walked in that room. And I think she was probably wearing she only had a few different outfits. They were all kind of a light green or a light yellow, and some had flowers and some were plain. But
did she seem to you at that point mentally capable of processing what was going on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And this, of course, is 5 years after the incident.
Correct.
She'd been in treatment and all of that.
Right. Okay. And I expected that. I mean, I didn't expect to see somebody with no affect. She was, and I didn't know what that term meant until later, by the way. But she just sat there with her eyes down most of the time. At times she did look up and look at the testimony as it was being given, but very little reaction from her most of the time.
Okay.
I did see her cry at least once when they brought the pictures of the kids out, and she broke down.
It's been 20 years. What testimony stays with you most?
Oh, that's easy. Dr. Philip Resnick, there at the end of the trial. Something that unlocked a lot of this for me were his words when he spoke of her mental illness and her religion. And he said that her religion and her religious beliefs were the lattice upon which the ivy of her mental illness grew. And that gave me a visual construct that I could grab onto and think about how she might have been thinking. Because one of the things we talked about in the jury room was we are sane people trying to apply logic to an illogical, potentially insane mind. That was not a term we used, right? She suffered from a severe mental disease or defect. That was the Texas Penal Code, right? And that's how we referred to it. Yeah.
So take us into the jury room then. So you've heard all this testimony. It's been over a month. This is a serious, not just commitment, but mental and an emotional roller coaster, I'm going to guess. So in that jury room, when you get the first, vote through, what does the breakdown look like? What's the mood, if you will, the thought process of the jurors?
I would tell you that in the moment when we discovered what everybody's position was, that's when we realized, okay, now we got to get to work, right? When you spend all that time with that group of people in such close quarters, right, and you can't talk about the trial in the jury room until deliberations start, you get to know each other. I mean, you get to be friends, because what else are you going to talk about? And as they selected me to be the foreperson, I went, okay, now what? I kind of felt like Robert Redford at the end of The Graduate. Now what do we do? And so I said, okay, I guess we should vote somehow and write it on a piece of paper and put it in a hat and come out with that. And that's what we did. And it was kind of funny, actually, as we went through not guilty by reason of insanity, NGRI, guilty, not guilty by reason of insanity. And then the last one I pulled out said not guilty. Well, nobody believed that. And the woman sitting next to me went, by reason of insanity. She added it to her slip of paper. And I went, okay, well, we now know that it's 8-4. 8 people believed that she was not guilty by reason of insanity, including me. And then the other 4 believed that she was guilty. well, now what? And I said, I guess we probably just need to start talking about why we believe what we believe. This is not an opportunity for the 8 people to sway the 4. It is the opportunity for those of us that believe something different to sway those that believe something different, right?
So both sides
Correct.
having that opportunity
So
to talk.
let's talk about why. And so the first juror that was willing to talk about why believed that, so the Texas Penal Code 8.01 states, it is an affirmative defense to prosecution that if at the time of the incident, as a result of a severe mental disease or defect, the defendant did not know what they were doing was wrong. So you have to first believe that she was suffering from a severe mental disease or defect, right? Behavioral disorders do not apply. So psychopathy and sociopathy do not apply.
Oh.
So it had to have been a delusional state, essentially, right? And so first, it's that she was suffering from a severe mental disease or defect. Second, at the time of the incident. So was it impacting that person when they committed the crime?
Andrea Yates would later be diagnosed with postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. The postpartum symptoms would play a significant role in court.
Cheryl Mercedes spoke with an expert about how the illness is identified, treated, and sometimes misunderstood.
As you know, postpartum depression took center stage with this case. Joining me now is Houston Methodist OBGYN, Dr. Rosalind Miller. Thank you so much for being with us today and for discussing this very important topic. First of all, tell us a little bit about what is postpartum depression and how is it diagnosed?
So what we know is there's several factors that play a role in postpartum depression. The biggest thing was to make the differentiation and the definition. So postpartum blues is what we commonly see when women are a little irritated, tearful. Typically this starts 2 to 3 days after childbirth, but those symptoms go away within the first couple weeks. Postpartum depression is when you have more severe symptoms, when you see those symptoms lasting longer. They can sometimes go weeks out from pregnancy or delivery, almost, even to a year.
What type of symptoms or criteria are clinicians looking for?
So we use a postpartum depression scale. So women now are screened during pregnancy. They're also screened after their pregnancy immediately. And this postpartum depression scale will generally just ask questions in terms of, are you sad? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel tearful? Do you no longer find things enjoyable that you used to find enjoyable? And then based on that scale, we're able to find those patients that need to have closer follow-up, maybe even psychotherapy or even medications.
So you mentioned the baby blues go away after 2 or 3 days, but postpartum, you are looking for that well ahead of delivery, correct?
Yes.
So are there any risk factors that women should be aware of to know that they might be in danger of experiencing this?
Absolutely. What we know is that women who have a history of anxiety or depression outside of pregnancy have an increased risk of postpartum depression. So that is why it's been imperative for us to start screening early in pregnancy, even before you get to the postpartum, because we know that those women will need more support.
Is there a spectrum, say from mild to severe, that you all place a patient on if you start beginning to see those symptoms?
So the biggest thing is reducing the shame. It is not so much the labeling aspect, but to provide a safety net for women so that they're able to express that something's going on, which is why we screen way more often than we used to. So it's not so much a continuum in terms of diagnosis, but when we do see that things are progressively getting worse, we are able to connect them with a healthcare provider that is, a professional in therapy, as well as starting them on medications and keeping them on medications if they were already on medications prior to their pregnancy.
Are there cases where it's so severe women need to be hospitalized?
There is a thing. It could be postpartum psychosis. If there's an issue where there's severe depression, those type of circumstances are typically outside of the gynecologist. For those, we would be referring that patient to someone who could definitely give them those resources.
How closely do you all work with psychotherapists to make sure that your patients are getting the proper care?
Very close, very close. Again, if we have a patient that has a history of anxiety or depression on any level, we are asking whether or not they already have a therapist that they work with. If they're already on medications, we are looking at the medications that they're on, making sure that they're conducive with pregnancy. We are making sure that they're following up with their therapist during pregnancy and outside of pregnancy. So we work very closely. There's phenomenal women's health organizations, perinatal mental health organizations that we can give them resources to, that they can make phone calls, virtual visits, in-person visits, all of the things.
So obviously treatment options and resources have changed since the turn of the century. How have they evolved, and what are some of the newer things available now?
Evolved immensely. Probably before 2010, women were just asked how they were feeling at their 6-week appointment. You come in for your 6-week visit, it was a general, how do you feel? What we know now is because of the guilt and the shame, most women weren't forthcoming that they were having any issues. Now we screen during pregnancy. We make sure that women have some contact with their healthcare provider even within those first 3 weeks that they're home. So someone's checking in, either an in-person visit or even a phone call from a nurse, that they're getting, someone is evaluating this person. So that's a more recent guideline, as well as obstetricians and gynecologists feeling comfortable with prescribing the medications. That has also been one of the newest in terms of guidelines from our governing body, saying we need to be prescribing these medications. If you don't feel comfortable, you need to make sure that this person is with someone who can. So the screening has changed. The safety net, meaning working together as a team to provide resources for these moms, have changed. All of those things have evolved within these past 20 years.
Can you speak to the most recent stats on how many women actually experience postpartum depression?
We think 7 out of 10 women, you know, in some way, shape, or form will have some issues in terms of postpartum depression. Again, that looks at, you know, the women with the postpartum blues that would go away just with more support at home. I'm just a little bit more sleep deprived versus all the way through. So very, very common. Making sure we're paying attention to that is definitely most important.
You mentioned the shame, the stigma, and you know how big of a role that plays sometimes with women who experience this. How can loved ones and friends who are around them support them?
Right. Identifying when you see your loved one is no longer enjoying things, feeling disconnected from the baby, feeling disconnected from friends, from family, really paying attention to where you can, you know, hop in maybe for support. I tell my patients all the time, you don't need anyone to come help you hold the baby. You need someone to make sure you are eating well, you're drinking your water, you're taking your naps, those sorts of things. But just allowing her to express that I just don't feel like myself, and not making her feel that this means that she does not love her baby. Those are the most important things I think that loved ones can do to separate what she feels in terms of her postpartum depression and what her relationship is with her child.
You know, that's a good point. I'm glad you bring that up, because a lot of times when we go visit women who have just given birth, the first thing we go to is the baby.
Exactly.
And we think with holding the baby, we're giving mom a chance to nap or a break or something else. But more times than not, we're not asking, hey mom, how are you?
Exactly.
What can I do for you? How are you feeling? So those conversations, you're saying, are very important.
Very important.
Okay. Can you talk to us about any kind of barriers there are for women who are seeking help with postpartum depression?
We're trying to alleviate those barriers. You always have to look at ability to get medical treatments or even therapy covered, if there's insurance barriers. We are seeing that there's a lot more organizations that are helpful for moms that, without the ability to pay, where we're not having to worry about if it's covered. So just making sure that we can provide those resources and letting patients know where they can get help. That's probably the biggest barrier that I see at this time.
Can you tell us about anything you'd like to leave us with in terms of a message or a takeaway from this conversation, Dr. Miller? Because, like you said, it's something a lot of people don't talk about until they experience it or they know someone who has.
Absolutely. Again, I say we have to stop the stigma. We have to reduce the shame. We also need to make sure that we're screening often, because we know that hormonal shifts after you have a baby is pretty extreme. So you may be doing well at one point or think you're doing well, but maybe not in another week or two. So making sure that we're screening often. Pediatricians are also screening. So when moms are taking their babies to the pediatrician's office for that first visit, they're also very keen on asking moms. So stopping the stigma, screening often, provide resources. If you are not comfortable providing medications for these patients, refer them to someone who will, and create this safety net so that women know that they're not alone, that there are resources here to help them, that we don't have to have a situation where a mom suffers alone with this stigma.
Yeah, it sounds to me like in a stigma where, people are suffering alone, there's help available, and teamwork is key here with loved ones and physicians.
Absolutely.
Communication is key. All right, Dr. Miller, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate your
My
insight
pleasure.
and your comments.
Thank you.
The Andrea Yates case remains one of the most well-known and consequential stories in legal history.
Changing the way courts recognize mental illness and warning signs for communities. Thank you for watching on KHOU 11+.